Hi, I'm Carl Schultz. I'm currently Vice Chairman of the Wareham Planning Board.
My name is Julie Moran. I'm a resident of Wareham.
My name is Sherry Quirk. I am on the Planning Board as an associate member.
And we're here to talk about the zoning bylaw changes that are going to be brought forward at Fall Town Meeting. Part of the genesis for some of these changes was the recognition by the Planning Board that we're dealing with new and emerging technologies, particularly in the area of solar and battery, and the way the current bylaws are structured may not adequately address or give the ability to work through the process as cleanly and effectively as possible. In addition, over the past several years, for all of the zoning, solar projects in particular that have come forward, citizens have brought forward issues, concerns, complaints that perhaps we weren't able to adequately or directly respond to. And there are opportunities to make improvements to the bylaws. The big issue that we started out dealing with was the difference between a site plan review and a special permit. And in the current bylaw, those two are tightly coupled. And one, at least, of the solar projects challenged that concept. And so we're attempting to address that and clarify that.
Over time, our planning, various permitting authorities, Planning Board, Zoning Board of Appeals, had, and the Select Board in some regard, they have some limited jurisdiction. We really had seen that there was a good deal of confusion in some respects by the boards, but even more so by the applicants about what the requirements were for a particular land use permit. What was the process? What were the documentation they needed to submit? What was the standard for review? So we decided in taking Articles 14 and 15 to start that we would reorganize. We had really four goals: clarify the land use permit process, who are the boards that approve them, who issues them, and then the next was to reorganize, to streamline the process, to make sure that people looking at the articles could determine what permit do I need, what are the requirements, what are the expectations from me as an applicant, as a property owner.
In discussing the changes that we're going to propose for the bylaws at Fall Town Meeting, we can start by discussing Article 3, which broadly speaking describes all of the land uses that are appropriate or I'll use the word appropriate in town. And it's really just a big table that says the type of use and which zoning district it's allowed in. So it's where most of the thought process starts, is a broad overview of how the town views land use. In particular, for this round of updates, we're going to focus again on one particular aspect of that, which is large-scale ground-mounted solar. And we're going to clarify, as I said, the distinction between where you need a site plan review and where you need a special permit. And in general, we're going to say that you need both in the districts that it's allowed. The other thing that Article 3 includes is definitions of those land uses, and we're trying to make sure that all of the land uses are defined and defined clearly. I will say we made progress, but that is not in any way complete. There's still more work that needs to be done on defining the land uses, and that will continue in future versions. But that's sort of cleanup. The key focus is to fix the land use rules or guidance for large-scale ground-mounted solar. Now, we'll talk later about some other bylaws that are coming forward that will also make changes to the use table, and we can talk about those related to the specific article. Briefly, we could talk about Article 5 and the changes there. The biggest area of focus there is really the solar article, which is Section 590. The town has spent the last 4 years trying to get that section Right. And at Springtown meeting in 2022, the town approved a version of that bylaw. And I think last Monday, we finally got the Attorney General's ruling on that bylaw. And most of it was approved, but now we've got to go back and deal with her feedback. Some of that will be brought forward in changes you see, and more particularly, and Sherry will talk to this, is bringing it forward to deal with the emerging battery energy storage aspects of the law.
And I think the issue that we're dealing with battery storage, which we seek to address, or will seek to address in the bylaw changes, is that there are concerns about the safety of batteries, concerns about fires at battery storage installations, lots in the papers about fires at e-vehicles, smaller installations, but also some fires at solar farms that I think at this point, it seems to me, are not yet well understood. And so through a bylaw, we're seeking to both enable energy storage, which we are required to do, as well as to make sure that it is deployed safely. So that, for example, if there is a fire, well, first of all, that really good technology goes into the development, construction, maintenance of energy storage facilities, mostly connected with solar farms, and that in the event there is a fire accident, that we have reviewed and made certain that whatever potential consequences there are, we have addressed and are ready for, so that we do not create contamination, harm, other threats to health, safety, or welfare to the people of Wareham. And this is something that the Planning Board has spent a good deal of time on, that we are on a steep learning curve for, but are really dedicated to getting right.
Article 12 is performance criteria, addresses performance criteria that all projects should be subject to. In doing the review, as I mentioned, we were trying to clarify site plan review and special permit. We identified that there was a particular clause in Article 12, that, to be specific, 1216.9, which said that special permits would be excluded from all of the performance criteria in Article 12. So we took a step back and tried to say, why would we do that? We tried to do some historical research to find out why that clause might have been introduced, and couldn't find any specific reason. But in discussion with members of the citizens, with the planning office, it doesn't appear that we want to exclude special permits from all of these performance criteria. So what we're recommending is that we delete that clause, which just restricts those criteria from special permits. And really it gives us, I think, better ability to design good projects.
So we started with Article 14, and what we looked at is how do we consolidate zoning administration and enforcement, because it appeared to be sprinkled throughout the bylaws. We certainly had a lot of references, which we continue to the use tables in Article 3, which is really how we determine how the permits are, what permits are required. But we really wanted to make sure that folks understood under zoning administration, how does the process work relative to approvals? We looked at performance guarantees. We clarified the situations where a performance guarantee might be required. We looked at when you are undertaking construction, we have a site inspection process that that an applicant would need to know about. We also talked about the concept of a complete application. Many of our boards and applicants spend additional hearing time looking at the nuances, looking at the requirements of an application. So one of the things that we did both in Articles 14 and then in 15 is to clarify that process, to tell an applicant, what does a complete application look like? What can you expect when you appear before the boards? What are the conditions and the review criteria they're going to look at when they're analyzing a permit? And so we also in Article 14 clarified what the zoning enforcement officer, who is actually our building commissioner, what his powers are, what his obligations are, what his authority is, if in fact there is a violation of a zoning bylaw, if in fact a project is not being constructed in conformance with a special permit, a site plan review, a special permit / site plan review process. So we really wanted to make sure that everyone would understand what the role of the zoning enforcement officer was. Then the next thing, we moved to Article 15, where we started with identifying the boards, looking at what are the types of project that each board undertakes, what type of projects are they assigned the land use permitting requirements. They are the permit granting authority, but what does that look like throughout the process? So we start with a preliminary design review, a preliminary zoning review that's conducted by the planning office before an application is submitted, that really gives the applicant an understanding of what we're looking for from a design review perspective. We also created the opportunity in the future to create a design review board to look at all of the different integral parts of a review of a project for permitting. We provided conditions. What are the conditions that an applicant should think about when they're coming forward for a permit? What should their application cover? What are the review criteria we're going to use? And that includes environmental sustainability issues, the project relative to the neighborhood, relative to the height, and all of that around the different buildings that may surround it. And also parking, movement of vehicles, pedestrian-friendly spaces, open space, which is one of our main town goals. So all of Article 15 integrates all of this. So it's, in some respects, it's one-stop shopping for an applicant. They can look at what they should be prepared to talk about at a hearing. And then we also looked at project completion certification. What does that process look like? Applicant feels that they have completed the project in compliance with the permits. They would then come to us with an engineer's certification, which will give the planning board or the zoning board of appeals or the select board assurance that the project has been completed in compliance with Massachusetts general laws, with the permit, and with all the other provisions of the bylaw. And then finally, we look at if in fact a project has taken more than 2 years to complete, and there are reasons why it has not been completed. We've created not really created as much as put down in a more clarified way what that process would look like for the permit granting authority to revisit the project and look at why was the project not completed within the 2-year period, and allows the applicant to come forward and show with the good cause why in fact this project was completed on time, and allows then the permit granting authority to consider whether or not they're going to allow an extension of that permit. So that's really, I think, the highlights of Article 14 and 15. Article 16, I will just explain briefly, is really a definitions section. What it does is it embraces the different new concepts that have been developed as part of this bylaw review process, and it captures new definitions to make it easier for someone to understand what expectations are under the definitions section, so they can look to the definitions section and use it as they read through the different articles within the bylaws.
The other change in Article 5 relates to co-location of emergency response communications antennas, co-locating that on cell towers. And right now, the town bylaws don't really allow that or require that. The change that's being put forward would require cell tower, new cell tower installations to allow co-location of emergency communications antenna, which will improve communications for the entire town. So fire, emergency, EMS, police, and enable better response. So that's a great move forward if we can get that passed.